Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to a realm where reality intertwines with the inexplicable, where the boundaries of reason dissolve into the shadows of uncertainty. Welcome to the political twilight zone. I am your guide through this enigmatic labyrinth, where politics and power take on life of their own. In this dimension, the threads of truth weave a tapestry of intrigue, challenging our perception of the world we thought we knew. In this world, nothing is as it seems, and the truth lies buried beneath layers of deceit. Prepare to venture where reason meets the unexplained, and where the unexplained might just be. Hey, everybody, we're back. Rick Wagner here this weekend on the Rick Wagner Show. Oh, that's how that works. I am back with Getting It Right, which is another way we like to speak about the show, because we're right. Now, we're almost always right. We're also always certain, though. So, there you go. It isn't too hard to be right today. It's there's so many things wrong. Anyway, I was thinking about, I Never Promised You a Rose Garden. Remember that song? Yeah, I looked it up. Lynn Anderson, I think, was the first person to sing it back in, I don't know, the 70s perhaps. And it was an interesting song, you know. And for some reason, the word pardon is kind of been on my radar lately. Maybe it's because it's such an interesting term coming out of Washington. Look at all the weird stuff they've been hearing about pardons. Presidential power to pardon. Pardon for crimes that haven't been yet committed. Or rather, crimes that we don't know if they were committed. Hard to say. It gets a little confusing. Now, the right to pardon for the president is contained in the Constitution. I want to say it's like Article 1, Section 3 or something like that. I haven't looked it up. And it is an interesting piece because, of course, like so many of these things, at the time it was enacted, it wasn't necessarily thought to be all that controversial. I mean, not to be used in such bizarre ways. Of course, we live in bizarre times. So because of that, who knows how these things get used. So here we are where Joe Biden has pardoned his son, Hunter. Now, the interesting thing about this is, and this is some of you heard, of course, is that not only did he pardon him for the crimes he committed and was entered a guilty plea for, but for crimes known and unknown that may have occurred since 2014. That's an interesting use of the pardon power. We've never really had much in the way of cases about the pardon power, for the Supreme Court, because there is some definitional stuff that needs to be sort of sorted out if these people start using it kind of willy-nilly. I think that Alexander Hamilton, I'm trying to remember which one of the Federalist Papers, 52, something like that, but Alexander Hamilton had some things to say about the pardon and the power of the pardon and how to be used and so forth, and that should be somewhat guiding for us. I mean, these people did, kind of come up with the Constitution, but what do they know about it? They were just so long ago. I mean, who knows what they thought? Well, we do know what they thought because they wrote it down. It doesn't seem to be a secret. But at the same time, so many of the people in Congress and on the courts even kind of in the dark about it. But here's one of the things. A pardon is something that you implement when there has been a transgression. Usually, the idea is that you can identify the transgression. There is an identifiable crime or accusation of a crime or something like that, if you want to broaden the definition out a little bit. It's not like, hey, whatever you did the last 10 years ago, that's great. No, that's not really how that works. And so this 10-year pardon, which contains apparently a lot of get-off-the-hookedness, I think that's what we call it, get-off-the-hookedness, for Hunter, for things that we haven't discovered yet. Does that seem a little reckless to you? Yeah, it kind of does, doesn't it? Normally, most legal scholars would say, and I hate to use the word legal scholars because, what most of those are like, but they would say that you need to have an identifiable act or crime to go along with that. Just saying it about a period of time, there should be some specificity. And remember, there are more things under that power than just pardoning somebody who's been convicted in federal court. or rather charged and entered a guilty plea. We have a couple other pieces in there. Commutation. The president has the power, and most governors have the power, to commute a sentence. Commuting a sentence, of course, involves taking what the sentence was and changing it. Now, our Constitution doesn't allow you to make it worse. Say, well, they give you 5 years, but I'd like to give you 10 just to be on the safe side. That's not how that works. When you commute a sentence to say, okay, they give you 5 years in prison, you've been there a year, I think that's enough, I'm going to commute your sentence and say, you've served your time, that's it. The president has that power. He also has a more interesting power that we've never really checked on because the time it was used, and it's been used a couple of times. After the Civil War, lots of folks in the Confederacy were supposedly, people will say, pardoned, from what? Well, rebelling against the government of the United States. But that's not really a pardon. That's amnesty. Now, amnesty has been thought to be a power of the president for a while. One of the things that comes up, and I think this is true, I know it's true, I think, is that Jimmy Carter, when he became president, granted amnesty to individuals who had fled their draft notices and went to Canada, which was, at then, a federal crime. He didn't specify each and every person. He simply said, these people, at this time, who have committed or allegedly committed this crime, are pardoned or rendered amnesty, because pardon isn't quite right for that. So here's a good question. If you can do amnesty for a particular group, not an individual, what would keep Joe Biden from granting amnesty? Well, we've been talking about him doing it, Fauci and stuff. We'll talk about it in a second. What if he just decided to grant amnesty to all illegal persons in the United States, people who entered the country illegally? If you entered the country illegally between such and such date, you are granted amnesty for that crime. You don't have to be individually charged. You don't have to have a count against you, but you're just granted amnesty. There's an argument to be made, good argument made that probably is something that was in the president's power to some extent, especially if you go back and see what Lincoln did. There's no way that Lincoln was able to go to every single Confederate soldier that was given a pass and name them and specific. It was more of a general amnesty for individuals who had rebelled against the country. Now, if they committed other crimes, other than just the rebellion, wanton murder, homicide, things like that were outside of the technical boundaries of the rebellion, they could also be arrested for those and prosecuted for those. So there was some guardrails on that. So there's a really interesting thing to think about. Now, right now, we're hearing this out of supposedly the White House staffers. We know that Joe doesn't think about it because he wouldn't think about anything, really. That maybe blanket pardons for Fauci, Adam Schiff, James Comer maybe. I didn't hear his name, but I bet he's in there. And should be granted before Biden leaves office. Oh, and he might put himself on that list, too. That's an even interesting question. Can you pardon yourself? Maybe. I mean, these questions have never really come up. It shows you how much trouble we are in this country, that these questions haven't come up because people thought they had a generalized understanding of what was meant in the Constitution, and they had the Federalist Papers to kind of refer to, and look at that. But can you pardon somebody, like, once again, who hasn't been charged with anything, and or any specific acts? Because, you see, you don't know. And you can only do it for federal crimes. So you would have to say that Anthony Fauci or Joe Blow or whoever you want to name during this period of time has been pardoned or granted amnesty. I still think it's amnesty from any prosecution or pursuit for a federal crime. I'm not 100% sure you can do that. Nobody's really asked the courts. I think we ought to kind of find out because we live in strange times. And these are strange people. We'll be right back. Well, hi, thanks for coming back. I put a little clip in there. I'd forgotten that Biden had, in fact, pardoned the turkeys Thanksgiving, so he's getting some practice. He's warming up to it, pardoning a couple of turkeys. The turkeys' name, by the way, were Liberty and Bell, so that they would not be dinner. So I think that would probably apply to some of the people in his administration, probably for the same reasons. So he's warming up. He's got it going on. That was his setup for pardoning Hunter. I don't know one make too much out of this, but we could have some really interesting questions coming up, like we talked about in the last segment, about what are the limits of what's called a plenary power? Are there limits per se in terms of scope or activity that you can pardon, things like that? We have a lot to find out. Hopefully, we're not going to have to try and do that this time, but we still need some answers. Once this pops up, you realize there's some odd questions out there. Could you do that? Could you not do that? What about if they haven't met a crime? What about if I said from the, I pardon you for any crimes that you've committed since your birth until today? Is that possible? Well, how's that different than 10 years? And these are kind of these odd questions that the law really needs to address, because at some point they become, unfortunately, important. So here we are. Yeah, it's been quite a week. Let's see. Many of you probably saw, by the way, I'm just looking at some of the I'm just looking at some of the crazy stuff that happened this week. One of which some of you probably saw, and you probably had heard this played before, but this interchange between the acting Secret Service Director Ronald Rowe and Representative Pat Fallon during a hearing on the Trump assassination attempts. I think that was Wednesday, maybe Thursday morning. And Rowe, who's an interesting dude, because you would look at him, he's kind of squared away, kind of got a high and tight haircut. He looks like, this guy, maybe something going on. Maybe looks like the Secret Service. He seems to be something a little more unusual in that. I don't think he's what he appears. Don't know, but just this is the few times I've seen him. So what he was being questioned about was on September 11th of this year, when President Trump was talking about the 9/11, visiting that situation, Rowe shows up there. Now, there's a Secret Service detail already there on Trump, thankfully. And so and this is, I think, a little weird. Fallon wanted to know why Rowe was there. And he kept asking if he was a special agent in charge. Well, that's an interesting question, because no, he's not the special agent in charge of that detail, but he does run the organization. So can he be there? And Fallon's point was, look, by him horning himself in there, he actually disrupted the area of protection around President Trump. And he wanted to know why he was there. The idea being that he just showed up there to cozy up to Trump and say, hey, I'd like to keep this job. I mean, that seems to be the undercurrent there. The fact that these guys got so mad about it was pretty interesting, because Rowe immediately jumped into this when they were questioning why he was there about the 9/11 and honoring people, and he was there sifting through the debris at the 9/11. Kind of over the top stuff, really. And Fallon got upset with this, and they went back and forth. It was really not a very particularly attractive interchange in Congress, but it just shows you how wound up everybody is, right? I mean, they just can't quite, settle down. Everything has got them wound up. Another thing that's interesting, too, and some of you probably saw this, I think this was in several of the sites, is there's a bunch of black churches. Now, I've always hated this kind of stuff, like black colleges, black churches, because someone is predominantly one thing or another doesn't necessarily mean that you'd be labeling them all the time. But anyway, these churches are predominantly made up, apparently, of, African American constituencies. And they're upset because Kamala Harris apparently played Al Sharpton's organization, something like $500,000, maybe more, before he ran a really softball interview and sort of quasi-endorsement for her. The other church leaders think that's just not great. that implies the idea that you can buy the will of a specific religious leader or something like that. I understand what they're saying, but you do realize who you're talking about, right? You're talking about Al Sharpton here. So you're trying to make a point about ethics, morality, truth, stuff like that. And, if you'd like to make that point about him, you might just examine some of the things in his past that have come up. Oh, the Tawana Brawley thing. I think there's some taxes out there. I don't even know. There are several things that it might give someone pause long before accepting this money to his foundation or whatever he wants to call it before he interviewed Kamala. I mean, there's plenty to have already been a little concerned about, and nobody had much to say about that. But now, so I don't like feigned outrage, and I don't know if they're feigning it or not, but I mean, there's plenty of more interesting things to talk about when it comes to Al Sharpton and things he's done, or allegedly done, or we'd like to know if he's done. And this just seems like pretty small potatoes. And are you surprised that this came up? I mean, and look at some of the other donations, of course. Like Oprah maybe got between $1 and $2 million. It sounds like, I can't quite figure it out. And she was constantly saying that I never received any money. No. You never received like a bag of money, no. But your production company, Harpo Productions, apparently received some money. Fair amount of money. Now, at Harpo, because I was discussing this with somebody, someone thought that, and this is, I think, a good guess, that Harpo Productions had something to do with Harpo Marx. And if you're kind of a movie buff, Harpo Marx was one of the Marx brothers. Groucho, Harpo, I can't remember the third one. There's four of them, and for some reason I'm losing track of it. But anyway, Harpo was one of them. That's not why that name is there. And if you take a second and look at it, you realize that Harpo Productions is Oprah spelled backwards. So it's pretty much her. So you can make your own mind up about that. I thought her decrying to say, I never received any money. Okay. That's sort of like saying, well, somebody came in and paid all my expenses for a year, but I didn't get any money. That seems to be a little bit on the disingenuous side. So we got a lot of that stuff going on out there. Kamala has been trying to get more money because, as you guys know, she was like $20 million in debt after spending $1 billion to not get elected and not do particularly well, and actually have pretty much of a landslide against her. The left is still absolutely out of their minds by the fact that not only did Trump win, and he won with a pretty convincing amount of electoral college votes of 312, you only need 270, but that he also won the popular vote, which makes them crazy. And as we talked about here before, there are several states that are trying to get part of a compact to say, look, we are going to give our electoral college votes to whoever wins the popular election. We're not going to allocate them some other way, which is extra constitutional. Colorado has been saying that. I don't know why Colorado doesn't go back and award its, I think 10 electoral college votes to Trump. Because even though the people of the state of Colorado, unfortunately, did not vote overwhelmingly, or even the majority of which, to elect Donald Trump president, the national popular vote did. So if that's your barometer, where's them votes, right? Well, come on, cough them up. Let's see where they're at. That has dropped off the map, and it won't show up again for a while, and then it will show up again. They hate parts of the Constitution. Let's be serious about this. There are many people on the left that think the Constitution is just a roadblock to what they want to do, and this is a good example. Having a system of government that is completely tied to direct democracy is pretty much proven to be unworkable. Our founders, who are much smarter than the people in government now, as near as I can tell, realized this and tried to set some situations and checks and balances we've heard to prevent certain things from happening. One of which is letting a few populous states control what happens all across the United States. Because that's what would happen if you just did the popular vote. It would be difficult to even have any interest in some states if you were a candidate, compared to making sure you carried the big states. So in order to make sure people concentrate on those a little bit, you can put a coalition of states together, maybe some of the small ones, maybe one of the big ones and a bunch of small ones, so that you can sort of make this puzzle together to get elected. That was their thinking. You at least have to pay attention to these things. If you go by the national popular vote, that's not the way it's going to go. I mean, the other thing they're on about occasionally, and I always thought this was interesting, was why there's 2 senators with each state. There's big population differences. So why does Montana get 2 senators and New York get 2 senators? Population's really different. Once again, it was a way to stop the tyranny of the majority, we may as well call it, from happening between the states and letting a few people in special interests in large states essentially run roughshod over everybody else. Hey, everybody. Thanks for sticking around again. I appreciate that. I'm trying to be a little more upbeat here. You know, I was looking at my notes back on this story about the acting director of the Secret Service, Rowe, and I originally thought that they were saying that he was trying to, buddy up there with Trump at September 11th, but apparently he was trying to nudge his way up next to Biden. There's a, sinking your, what is that? Attaching yourself to a falling anchor. Yeah, I think that's something like that. But, man, and I went back and listened to that interchange between them. I know you guys have heard it all the time because everybody loved to play it because it was exciting. But first of all, how does he get so worked up about his position at the 9/11? Because that was the deal. Not that he was at the 9/11 memorial, but that he decided to take the place of the special agent in charge of that detail, or rather, where that special agent in charge would be in that position. They're very particular about their positions, obviously, and things like that. So he sort of got his way in there, right? And so that was just, the whole thing's weird. This let me tell you what, the whole government right now is weird. I don't understand about 60% of what's going on. And a lot of the stuff I do understand, I don't like. You guys may remember yesterday that Daniel Penny, the ex-Marine, who that seemed to have identified with now, that put the kind of crazy person in a chokehold on the subway in New York. And to me, and now I don't know everything, of course, didn't do anything wrong trying to protect people from someone who was obviously manifesting violent and dangerous behavior. Unfortunately, the man passed away during this interaction. So, he's been on trial for like a really long time here. And the jury couldn't reach a verdict. Normally, if they can't reach a verdict, you declare a mistrial, and the district attorney's office would have to decide whether or not to do the whole thing over again. But here, they dropped the manslaughter charge, which was the more serious charge, and just left the other charge in, and let the jury, tell the jury to go back and work on that. That's an unusual way to handle these kinds of things. What I think I can say, and I'm not sure this is legal commentary per se, is that I ain't headed to New York for a while, like a real while. I mean, I used to go there once in a while for, I'd visit it and then, stuff like that, little visits there once. Mainly just, to look around. Go to museum, go to Times Square, something like that. I was at the Christmas tree there one year, and I'm not going back anymore. Not for a while. First of all, I'd rather not get accosted by somebody on the street who would be interested in, alleviating my belongings. They'd be very disappointed at that point, but, that's the way it goes. And the fact that everybody's so bold because the word is out. Nothing happens to you if you, get in trouble there, unless you're Daniel Penny, apparently. This whole trial, and many of you have probably heard about it, but this whole trial has been bizarre. The evidence that came in on this is a little disturbing and out of context.
The medical examiner made a finding on this guy's death, the victim's death here, without waiting for toxicology or these other reports to come back in. Those are important things to know. So it looks as though this was just going to go away after the death, because I mean, I saw some of the interviews with people who were on the subway car, and they were saying, look, we were scared of this guy, and then one of them even said, that dude over there did not do anything wrong, meaning Penny. But some protests started, of course, because, and this is something we have to realize, is we live in a country now that has a lot of professional protesters. I mean, I don't know how they get paid. I don't know how they live life, but they just are sitting around on a tripwire waiting for something or anything to remotely happen that they can protest. That they might be able to make into some sort of racist, sexist, misogynistic, transistic, is transistor? No, I guess not. Transistic sort of thing going there. Oh, I like transistor. Unfortunately, I think that I can't make that connection because it is an electronic part. Anyway, so they can just head to the streets and, take their ire out on everybody else. And if you're going to give in to that, if it's going to move people all the time, they're just going to keep doing it. And wherever some of this impetus for these protests come from, and, we've seen several stories, particularly during the George Floyd riots and so forth, about, individual vehicles showing up with equipment, like stacks of bricks were found places, and, all kinds of things that seem to be, can we say, goading people on or giving them supplies if they're a little bit crazy. And always before, when you hear somebody say, oh, this was mainly outside provocateurs, you always take that with a grain of salt. Here, I think that it's probably been true in a lot of these things. And so, Alvin Bragg, it's just, here's the thing. If you live in the city of New York and you voted for Alvin Bragg, then good for you. You should be subjected to whatever whimsical, crazy, bizarre, and unconstitutional and un-American ideas about justice that he has. But people who didn't vote for him, or people from somewhere else, it's as though you're building a legal fence around the place, in the sense that it's warding people off. I know a lot of people that are not interested in going to New York, just like me, unless, they absolutely have to. Because it seems like, and of course this is just the news, and we know how the news can single things out and make them seem like there's a lot more of it happening than there actually is. But it does seem like that you're really, what shall we say, in danger, yes, when you're in New York and some of these places. It's funny because some of the places they're talking about, where they've had all these migrant problems and robberies and things like that, I've been. And when I was there, it was not that bad. It was a little crowded. There were some unusual characters around, but hey, it's New York. There's unusual characters everywhere. I mean, I lived in Boulder. I know unusual characters. And so, but you didn't have that feel of a danger. Now, and we talked about this a while back, now these places, they appear to be feral, right? Meaning that at one point they were civilized and, sort of brought into the family, like house pets. And then they just have run wild, and they have turned into a feral situation where it's, the war of all against all, as we might hear from some of our friends that wrote the Leviathan. I'm not so sure that that's too far off. I mean, I used to think it was, we're just talking about it in general, but look at the examples you see. And more than the examples you see, look at what is being done to address the problem. Problems can pop up anywhere, although obviously most of these problems, probably 70% of them are the result of their own policies. But usually when it happens, someone can do something about it. Doesn't seem to be happening. And I also have the feeling that there's a substantial amount of individuals that live in these areas that aren't happy about it, but don't seem to be able to change it. Washington State really like that. So is Oregon. One of them wanted to not cooperate with ICE on detaining and extraditing. I guess extraditing isn't it, but deporting illegal aliens. So they were trying to deny them the use of the municipal airfield. Now, how does that happen? I mean, one of the very few things that the federal government is specifically in charge of is immigration. One of the things that we're supposed to uphold and protect is the Second Amendment. It's actually in the Constitution. And it's all upside down. These guys want to resist one of the enumerated constitutional powers, essentially, the Constitution of the federal government, and they want to ignore the interpretation of the Supreme Court and everybody else on Second Amendment issues. It's topsy-turvy. I don't know how you address it. At some point, things have get so backward that it takes something fairly momentous to turn them around. Now, we did have a pretty momentous election. And I've been reading, and I talked about this before, there's a lot of people on the right that are fairly giddy about the election. Now, I'm very happy too. But I've seen what happens if you think you've won when you haven't really won. And we haven't. Yeah, the Democrats are back-footed. They really thought they could create a candidate out of thin air, have a vibe campaign, get Tim Walz out there and his rotating hand movements, jazz hands, I think they call it, and that somehow the vibe would just carry over. They also thought that the only issue they needed to run on was abortion. And the issues that they ran away from were what people cared about. So they're in a tailspin. But it's happened before. It's happened to both parties, but it's certainly happened to the Democrats too. And we act like that, oh, well, now we're riding high. Sort of. We're going to have President Trump running the executive branch. It's a big deal. We're going to have control of the Senate. That's a very big deal because the Senate is what, of course, confirms all of these appointees. And, by the way, Supreme Court justices. As I mentioned before, our grip on the House, pretty slim. As it stands now, I think it's 2. We're at 220, need 218. A flu bug goes through there, who knows, right? Flu bug goes through there. The Republican caucus are meeting. Everybody gets the flu. They have to stay home. Who knows what happens then? It's too close. Plus, there's just, and this is a surprise, weirdness that went on in these races in California, these congressional races. And I think we really have to watch what's going to happen. And I hate to say this, I mean, we just got through 2024, and 2026 elections, because congressional district elections seem to be easier to, I don't know, maneuver around. Go back and look, because we won't bore you with it, but at these 5 races in California that were not decided on Election Day, like that we have an Election Day, that weren't decided that day, or that week, or that month. Some of them were just decided. Now, I've complained about the fact that we can't count votes faster than, I don't know, Iran, or some place where they actually care about the outcome because it's not predetermined. Well, pretty much anywhere in the world has got a better idea about what's going to happen in their elections sooner than we do. How did that happen? And we've become very used to this thing where, in certain instances, the votes just are hard to figure out. It's going to take a long time to count them. Yes, it is. Really? Why does it take so much longer for some of these places to count them than, say, congressional district 50 miles away? What's the difference? I've never really heard that addressed. Are they that overworked? Are the ballots poorly marked? Do they have terrible working conditions? What's going on? Why can't they get the job done? Because if nothing else, it undermines the trust everybody has in this. I mean, when you stop counting votes, for instance, come back the next day, and then start dribbling vote totals out, and you live in a district that is, strongly or, at least majority Republican, and every time the votes are counted, after a few days, there's some Republican votes and just a few more Democratic votes. And it just keeps building up. And people lose these races by like 187 votes or this or that. Now, that may very well be the case. I don't have any direct knowledge of this, but it sure seems weird. And I don't mean weird like Tim Walz weird. I mean just in terms of the situation. And I worry that we're just getting to the point where some states, and by some states I say California. I'm in Colorado, of course, where most of you are at, and it's not that far behind. But California it's next to impossible to detect voter fraud. I mean, you cannot show an ID to vote. And provisional ballots, ballot harvesting, unlimited ballot harvesting. Dump truck, semi-truck, whatever, how many votes you want to bring in, you can bring those in. Who thinks that's a good idea? Well, they do. Why do they think that's a good idea? Well, that's the question we have to ask ourselves, isn't it? So you have this ballot harvesting, you have no ID, you have provisional ballots, you have it's all mail-in or send-in, as we think. They mail it out, and who knows how it gets back there. And then we're told that this system is just as secure as someone coming into a polling place, handing a photo ID over, actually from the United States, that says, like a driver's license or identification card, something like that, and then having them checked against the register there, in your polling place, okay, that's you, and go vote. There's no difference between that and sending a ballot off into the stratosphere and wondering when it's going to come back or who's going to bring it back. You don't even know who's going to bring it back. Some dude. He doesn't even have to bring it back to you, per se. He can just go dump it in one of the numerous ballot boxes around the place. I'm not saying that elections have ever been 100% easy to regulate in the United States. It's always been a problem. I mean, it's a problem anywhere with voting, right? Because so much rides on it. You got to constantly sort of keep your hand on that scale to make sure it stays even by doing that in terms of giving people the right to privacy in their vote, but making sure that the individuals voting are who they're supposed to be and are eligible to vote. And we seem to have just decided that this doesn't matter. And I know this is an old drum we're beating here, but hopefully Congress, there's going to have to be several different things done in this 2-year period. While we have control of the House, so at least the Democrats can't start another impeachment hearing right away, and we should able to get some legislation through, common sense legislation, like the Democrats like to say about gun control, common sense legislation, where we take your guns away, just common sense. We need to get some through. And in the past, of course, with voting, as many of you know, the framers wanted to leave the qualifications for voting outside of certain broad parameters in the Constitution to the states, and the states regulate that. I don't like the idea of nationalizing anything. I'm not aware of very many things that have been nationalized that work very well. Some things you have to. A military, for instance. You need a military, it's pretty much got to be a nation state running it. Control of the high seas. There's several different things you can think off the top of your head that make perfectly good sense to nationalize. Are they going to be run as efficiently as, say, if some company on, like Meta was running it? Probably not. Because the way government runs does not tend towards efficiency because there's no downside for being inefficient. This is why this Doge thing with Elon and Vivek is so interesting. And we talked about this before. This loon, who's in Congress, of course, apparently that's a collecting place for loons, saying it's unconstitutional. It's it's illegal. Look, you can create any kind of commission you want to, especially the executive branch, to do something. As long as if it doesn't have any direct power over something, like it's another department, If it's just a blue ribbon commission on, personal fitness or whatever the case may be, you can do that all day. The Constitution doesn't speak to that. I mean, because if you don't give it direct power, then it's just essentially an advisory board. So this person either just wants to stir people up or doesn't understand the Constitution, and I lean towards the second part, although they probably still want to, stir people up. But this is going to be a great thing, I think, because just shining a light on some of this. Like I've heard people talking this week about this discovery that we have government buildings that are pretty much empty and have been for a couple of years. Everybody's working remotely, sort of like a remote control. You know how the batteries go out on that and it doesn't work? There you go. And some of these buildings have 6% occupancy. These are expensive buildings, and they're being maintained when no one's there. I mean, it doesn't make sense. And the fact that it's being revealed is really important. I've said this before, that we haven't really had a budget hawk out there that is willing to spend time and work towards getting some publicity for wastes of money. It's hard to do now because the media thinks that any government spending, as long as it's, for something odd, is appropriate. But and I go back to William Proxmire, a Democrat, and his Golden Fleece Awards. Those things actually would make a little bit of a difference. I mean, he'd come up with some weird program out here that nobody had ever heard of that they were spending $10 or $12 million on. Now, change that million to billion, and you probably have the same thing. But most people don't know that. I mean, the cover's not ripped off. So if these guys could just bring it to the attention of the American public. And here's the thing. If the Republicans are in control of, let's say, the House of Representatives, they can at least hold hearings and take the information from Doge and act on it, or if nothing else, make the information that they've gathered public. So if you're spending, money to teach, blind people how to do underwater basket weaving in Ethiopia, you need to know that. And there's tons of programs out there that are not known. They're usually placed under one big ambient, one big programmatic name that has all these little tentacles on it where, all these weird things happen. It's sort of like these non-governmental organizations, People for the American Way. Really? I've seen a lot of that stuff. It didn't seem like America to me, at least not the American way I'm familiar with. So, and then by the time it trickles down, there's all sorts of things that are hidden within this bulk of money. This is why you have to have budget control. This is why it's so difficult for Congress, because it is so big and unwieldy. But there's so much money that goes through. You have to watch it. It's a big job. If you don't want it.
Hi, folks. Thanks for listening.
Exactly.
Listen, if you'd like to listen to more and you want to maybe perhaps have someone else listen to our podcast, you can do so either by going right to our webpage, politicalviking.com, or therickWagnerShow.com. Both of them take you there. You can get links right directly to our podcast, or you can hear our podcast on Podbean, on iTunes, and Spotify, and a couple others. So you can find us. We appreciate it if you do. And if you've heard the show, you want somebody else to hear it, that's a good way to send it to them. Thanks for listening.